Hello, Jamie Sparling here, and I am the head instructor of Affinity Martial Arts in Wausau, Wisconsin. We want to hear about your formable moments. That's what this is all about. Whether it's in life and martial art, we'd like for you to take a moment, pause the broadcast, and tell us with hashtag formable a little bit about something you went through, your own story, where you came out on the other side, whether it be good or bad. Just take a minute and let us know your story, because your story is important. Michael, thank you for being here, and your story is super, super important. One of the things I love about it is it's a true JKD kind of progression because you went into the JKD, and next thing you know, you're finding yourself at what became mixed martial arts, right? And I
Correct.
mean, going in and working with the Gracies and doing those different things and just learning grappling in different situations. Uh, you are a medical doctor and you are a ringside physician. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That is fascinating to me. When we once had a conversation, you told me about how many people were actual ringside physicians.
Yeah, there aren't many. To contextualize this a little bit, going back to the 80s again, there was a high profile boxing death, and that was actually in Madison, Wisconsin. And then as we progressed into the late 80s and 90s, there were some really high profile deaths in the tough man contests. I don't know if you remember when those were really
Mm-hmm.
popular there for a while. And so at about that time, there was a big push to kill combat sports, and they came very close to outlawing boxing and kickboxing. It very close, and the medical community was in many cases very supportive of that with the politicians, and so it became very hard for even the legitimate promoters to find physicians that would work fights. That probably stopped a lot of fights from happening more than legislation did. And so that's the backdrop. So
Mm-hmm.
I was already really involved not only with Jeff School, but I was working out at a couple of we had some high level boxing clubs in town. And even in Madison, when I went up there, I still, even though I wasn't competing, I was still working out at a boxing gym. And what happens is when your you know your your kickboxing friends and your boxing friends find out that you're going to medical school, the first thing that happened is they all started contacting me to be a cut man. And even the cut man business wasn't nearly as advanced back then. Anything you could do to help. So I was, the one-eyed king in the room. So I worked cut for a lot of fights. Um, Actually, Eric Morrell, who was a Wisconsin fighter, when he turned pro in Madison, Wisconsin, I was actually working his corner as a cut man. So through medical school, I did a lot of pickup work as a cut man because you don't have to be a licensed physician to do that. In fact, most aren't. And then as soon as I became an MD, people started reaching out to me, out of desperation to work as a ringside physician because otherwise the sanctioning body wouldn't let the fight happen if there's not a doctor sitting at ringside. And so, I was always driving somewhere to work as a ringside physician, and I never got you never got paid. You did
Mm-hmm.
it because you love the sport. You did it because really for the fighters, and to keep the sport going. So I bet, for 15 years, I probably never got a penny for being a ringside physician. I got to see the fights for free, but
Mm-hmm.
that's really about it. And then it was really only recently when I came back to Wisconsin, and I've been here for about 8 years. Another physician, let me know that the athletic commission needed ringside physicians, and that was a big change, by the way. It used to be the ringside physician was employed by the promoter, but a lot of states are going, no, you're employed by the commission. You're not going to be subject to the will of the promoter. You're going to, you're protected by us. You maintain neutrality. You can make the calls you make, and it was nice. And the other thing is they actually started paying me. So for the first time in my career, I actually started getting paid to be a ringside physician, which is great because for something you would do for free to actually get money for, it's nice. It's not a lot of money, but it's still it's easy to convince your wife to let you do it on a weekend when you're at least bringing something back. So
For sure.
that's been a great thing for me. I've always really enjoyed doing it. You are always really appreciated. Almost every fight, at least one fighter will come up to me afterwards and just say, listen, I really appreciate you doing this. The promoters and everyone else always do it, but the fighters, it really amazes me. They don't have any reason to do that, but they still go out of their way to let you know that they're grateful you're there. So I worked boxing, kickboxing, MMA events. I've gotten to work at UFC, which was really cool. So it's a nice side hustle.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, part of what you were doing with this is you were collecting data to kind of help with the fighters.
I will be collecting data.
Okay.
So, my medical practice, which is separate from all this, one of the things I do is I'm boarded in hyperbaric medicine, which is where you treat people by putting them in a chamber and having them breathe 100% oxygen at really high pressures. And one of the things it's theorized to be very helpful with is brain injury. The Department of Defense has a lot of interest in that. So, but the problem is how do you do a controlled study on that? You have to have a control population and you have to have a treatment population. And that's really hard to do. No one's going to volunteer for head trauma.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They do. That's the fighter population. So the study that we're getting ready to do, and the Wisconsin Athletic Commission so far has been very helpful with us, is we're going to look at fighters and they're just going to do a pre-fight online neurocognitive test, which is called the IMPACT. And then those fighters that get a TKO or a KO will either get randomized to the controlled group or the treatment group. And the treatment group will be treated with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And we're going to be looking at that to see if there is an improvement in their neurocognitive functions. I expect that there will be, just based on anecdotal evidence. And so that's really exciting. I think what makes it, there's twofold reasons why it's really exciting. On one level, there's absolutely nothing to treat concussion right now. So really, the treatment is cognitive rest. They tell you just to take it easy for a couple of weeks. So it gives us an opportunity to treat something that is not treated. The other thing is repeat concussions in fighters and other contact athletes, football players and hockey players, in all likelihood leads to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Right, punch drunk syndrome is what it used to be called, and it's a devastating illness. And it's an interesting illness in that it is a chronic and progressive illness. So a lot of times these fighters will be completely normal at the end of their careers. The average professional fight career lasts 8 to 9 years. So these guys are quit and they'll be great for 20 years, and all of a sudden they'll have a progressive neurologic decline. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is something called tau protein. And without getting too deep in the woods, tau protein, if you have a nerve fiber and there are these long type of cells, there are something within them called microtubules, which kind of transport food and nutrients back and forth along the cell. And these tau proteins stabilize these microtubules. And after repeated head trauma, they break away from the microtubule and they change shape. And once the tau protein changes shape, it causes other tau proteins to change shape. And it spreads, it kills the cell, and then those tau proteins spread to other cells and repeat the process. So it moves like an infection, which is why it's a very slow-moving infection, which is why it may take 20 years for the symptoms to develop.
Wow.
It's theorized, and there's some evidence to suggest that hyperbaric oxygen therapy can reverse that process or stop that process as well. So not only, it's my hope that not only will this help treat the concussion in the acute phase, but as fighters that get repeat concussions get treated with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, it will reduce the risk or stop the progression to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And so That's a big deal. That's a
Yes,
really
it
big
is.
deal, and that's something that can really change the lives of a lot of these athletes. An 8-year professional career is not worth sacrificing the remaining 20 or 30 years of your life. And if we can protect that, that's great.
Still protecting the fighters, man.
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely. And the really cool thing is that the fighters, by participating in this study, are protecting us, right?
yes.
Because the data that is learned from that protects everyone that gets a head trauma, motor vehicle accidents, motorcycle accidents, kids playing soccer, right? The knowledge from that protects everyone. So yeah, we're protecting the fighters. The fighters are protecting us. It's a win-win.
It sounds like a win-win. Just it touches my heart, and I laughed earlier when I said, that there are people that did sign. When you said people did sign up for head trauma. But quite often in our martial arts group, we like to watch the different combat sports because those great athletes put their body on the line for
Absolutely.
things that we hypothesize and play with, and it's all good. It's all important, you know. But you know, at the end of the day, you are a cut man to kind of help out the fighters, and now there's another way that you can help the fighters, and I think it's great. And I honestly didn't even think anything of the other side of it, which there are a lot of traumatic brain injuries out there right now, and uh, I've been a caregiver to a couple of those, and that's just very hard.
It's
Very,
very hard. And also, there is probably a lot of overlap between chronic traumatic encephalopathy and other dementias. So the benefits may extend well beyond just the traumatic stuff. It may have overlap into other forms of dementia. It may be beneficial for that. So it is potentially pretty exciting if once the study gets going and we can show some changes.
yeah. Hmm. So, we have a part of our new podcast here. We call it Chain of Change. All right. And all that is there anybody that you would like to see us have on the podcast and discuss their story? Somebody
There,
that's had some ups and downs.
there are two people, and I've talked about both of them.
Really? Yeah.
I think Jeff Westfall is one of the most interesting human beings I've ever met. And again, he came from the same crappy little town I did, but he's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And his story is really interesting, and I would like to hear more of it. He's known some really interesting people, and then I think Scott Sullivan would be a really interesting one as well. Scott's story didn't end with him being a martial arts champion. It really just started. So he then kind of went on an academic and spiritual journey, and he's got his PhD in theology. And he's a very devout Catholic. He does some really high level academic writing. He incorporates a lot of his philosophical instruction into his school, which is one of the things that has made his school so fabulously successful. And those are it's interesting when two of the smartest people are actually both martial artists, right? That tells you something, and they're committed. It's not like a hobby for them; it's their job. Um, and I don't think either one of them would consider it a waste of their intellectual firepower.
I appreciate that, and I will reach out to both of them. And we always talk about formable moments, right? And I wanted to talk to you about one, but I think we found one here. The formable moment of meeting Jeff Westfall
Oh,
and
without question.
finding a piece of, like, I just picture him as the dungeon master of this game that is pulling out in the 80s. I mean, in the 90s, it was hard to find capoeira. I was very, very lucky in like 2000 and maybe 12 or 11 to find an instructor, and in the Inosanto family. a lot of us were looking for people, and there was not as much people there. So in 1984, for him to have that grasp of things and that intellectual piece to know how they would fit together, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, we talk about formable moments, but the moment's really irrelevant. A moment is critical to your formation, not because of that piece of time, but because of that who you share that time with, right? It's not a formable moment, it's a formable personality, it's a formable interaction with another human being. If it's just you alone, yeah, Newton had the apple fall on his head, whatever. Those moments are kind of rare, but when humans are really inspired to greatness, it's usually because of another human being. We're social creatures, so it's the people that we interact with that really propel us to greatness. And the higher you have ascended in life, it only means that you were graced with really meeting some impressive people. Right? I consider myself a pretty good martial artist, but it has nothing to do with any intrinsic ability that I have whatsoever. I was just really lucky enough in early stage of my life to find some really good people. Right. That's the most important thing. If you don't have a teacher, you got nothing. And so, yeah, I think that moment with Jeff Westphal, I think the moment with Scott Sullivan, I think maybe the first time I felt a Thai kick from Chai Sarasute was a formidable moment.
Yes.
Because it's really humbling to see a guy that at the time he weighed 135 pounds, and I couldn't believe a human being could hit that hard. I think watching Scott get on the mat with John Machado the first time and just get handled like a little baby was a formidable moment for me. I realized how vulnerable everyone was if you didn't have a ground game. I've heard Joe Rogan say similar things about the first time he got on the mat, because he was a very accomplished stand-up fighter, and the first time he got on the mat with a good jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he just felt helpless, and that's the worst feeling in the world. No one likes that. I think that's a formidable moment. There are just so many. How do you pick out one? And you can't pick out the most, but you can pick out the people, and that's the critical thing about it. And I think neither Scott or I would be where we are were it not for Jeff Westphal.
God bless him, brother. Honestly, you are one of those formable relationships for me, and
I appreciate it. Likewise.
It's been amazing having you a part of the Affinity Martial Arts family and journey, and I'd like to bring you back on the podcast at a later date.
Anytime.
When we talk about some more things of helping the fighters, because that's incredibly cool, and it really, really needs to be done. One thing we try to do with the FormABLE Podcast is give a little instinctual, intrinsic inspiration, if you will, to our people. Sir, if somebody was telling you that they wanted to start a change in their life, like martial arts or something new, is there something you might tell them to do in the first 24 hours?
Yeah, and it's something I tell people this a lot of time, and I think almost no one listens, right? Because we've been brought up to follow our passion. Right? Do what you're passionate about. That's what's going to make you happy. And if that were the case, then the world would be full of rock stars and astronauts. Right? That's not the reality of the world. And there's not one part of my life that I planned that got me where I'm at. And so, but what I have done well is I've never let an opportunity slip past me, even if it's an opportunity I wasn't interested in. So anytime an opportunity has been presented before me where I can improve myself, physically, mentally, spiritually, especially within the work environment, you take it. Even if you're not interested in it, even if the timing's bad, you take that opportunity. There's an author called Cal Newport, and he talks, he wrote a great book, which is called Deep Work, which I recommend everyone read. And it's kind of like the obstacle is the way. It's kind of a similar concept. But he uses a term called the adjacent possible. And really what that is every time you capitalize on one of those opportunities, even if you're not really that into it, all these other opportunities present themselves that you would have never seen coming, right? And so the perfect example is the study we just talked about for my PhD is using hyperbaric oxygen to treat combat athletes, right? Well, that would have never happened if I didn't step on the mat when I was 11 years old, right? Because I would have never gotten interested. It would have never happened if I didn't go to medical school. It would have never happened. The only reason I got into hyperbaric medicine is because I had to support my patients because the doctors that were doing it left. I wasn't interested in hyperbaric medicine, so I had to learn it. And the reason I stayed in ringside as a ringside physician was for the fighters, but it was a drag. And then all of a sudden, here I am 20 years later, and it's all integrated together, right? I'm still a martial artist. I'm still a ringside physician. I'm still a hyperbaric physician. That's all integrated in for my dissertation that I'm working on my PhD. None of that would have happened if I'd have said no to a single opportunity. No, I don't want to be a ringside physician. No, I don't want to learn hyperbaric medicine. No, I don't want to work on a PhD. I'm 57 years old. Who wants to go back to school then? And once you start getting in the habit of saying no to opportunities, they stop presenting themselves or you stop seeing them. So the thing I would tell people that you start on tomorrow, the minute you wake up, is instead of lamenting about the status of where your life is, look at the opportunities that are presented.
Yes.
And even if they don't seem like there's going to be an immediate payback, take advantage of them because the adjacent possible is right behind them. And doors and windows and whatever are just going to start opening so fast that, in a few years, you won't believe the difference your life is. One of my favorite philosophers is also a martial arts instructor, and that's John Danaher.
Yes.
And he's very famous for saying, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and yet they underestimate what they can accomplish in 5. And I think that's the case. If you start taking advantage of these opportunities, 3-5 years, your life's going to be completely different. But you can't wait for the perfect opportunity or something that you're absolutely interested in. If it can make you better, even if it's a way you're not interested in, take it, do it, because it's always going to pay off.
God bless. That is absolutely awesome. And for our viewers out there and for myself, tomorrow, we're going to look for formable opportunities just throughout the day. And we never know where they're going to take us.
Condition yourself to say yes.
Yes. All right. Dr. Harl, appreciate you so much. And I will see you very soon. What a great episode. And I'll see you on the mat Saturday.
Very good, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care.